The snow had been falling since 3 in the afternoon, and by the time Ethan Cole dragged the last roller door down on his garage, the world outside had gone completely white. Not the clean, scenic white of Christmas cards, but the thick, blinding white of a mountain storm that didn't care what it buried or who it left stranded. In Aspen, that kind of snow meant business. He'd grown up in Pueblo, a flatland kid who'd arrived in the mountains at 22 with a wrench set and a vague plan and had never quite gotten around to leaving. 17 years later, he knew how to read this kind of sky. This wasn't a one-night storm. This was the kind that settled in, that rewrote the landscape for a week. That made you understand why early settlers in places like this either built deep roots or didn't survive the first winter. He was stamping his boots on the rubber mat inside when his phone rang. Not his personal cell. His work line. He considered letting it go. It was nearly 8. Lily was already at his sister's place for the night, and he'd told the last customer to call again Monday, but something about the hour made him pick up. Mr. Cole. A man's voice. Formal. A little too controlled, the kind of voice trained to not sound panicked even when it was. My name is Douglas Graves. I work private security for Miss Alexandra Frost. Ethan said nothing. He recognized the name. Everyone in Aspen recognized that name. Miss Frost has not responded to any contact since 6 this evening. We've had a team at the gate since 7, but the access road is impassable, the plow is an hour out at best, and the secondary entrance on the northwest ridge is blocked by a fallen pine. A pause. We know you serviced her vehicle 3 days ago. There's an access route through the Hendricks property, a gravel track your service truck has used before for winter deliveries. Ethan looked out the small window beside the door. The floodlight over the parking lot was just barely cutting through the snow. He thought about his truck, about his tires, about the track through the Hendricks property, barely a road in good weather. You think something's wrong with her? He asked. We don't know. Her husband departed this afternoon, and the household staff was released early. She has a history of... The man stopped himself. She is alone, Mr. Cole. We'd like someone to check on her. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. Lily was safe. His sister Janet had her, was probably reading to her right now, warm and dry. There was nothing stopping him from going home, heating up the soup he'd left in the slow cooker, and staying the hell inside like any sensible person would in this weather. I'll drive out, he said. The Hendricks track was worse than he remembered. His truck slid twice on the first switchback, and the third time he almost thought about turning around, but then the lights of the Frost estate appeared through the trees, all that glass and steel glowing orange against the white dark, and he kept going. He parked close to the front steps and walked through 8 inches of fresh powder to the door. He knocked, waited, knocked again. When the door finally opened, Alexandra Frost was standing there in bare feet on marble that had to be 40 degrees, wearing an oversized charcoal sweater, her dark hair loose, mascara tracked in 2 thin lines down her cheeks. She wasn't crying now. She was just looking at him like he was the last thing she expected to find on the other side of that door. Ethan said the only thing that came to mind. Your feet are going to freeze. He had been inside the estate once before, briefly, to return the keys after the service appointment. He hadn't paid much attention then. He did now. The main living space was enormous, floor-to-ceiling glass on 3 sides, giving an unobstructed view of the mountains that, tonight, was just a wall of dark and white and falling snow. The furniture was expensive and minimal. Pale stone, pale wood, a few pieces of art that looked like they cost more than his garage. The kind of space designed to impress, not to comfort. And in the center of it, Alexandra Frost looked small. She was 41, he knew this, from the same casual, unavoidable way everyone in the valley knew details about people like her. Founder and CEO of Arrowwood Systems, a data infrastructure company that had grown from a startup in her spare bedroom to something with offices in 7 countries. She'd been on the cover of business magazines. She testified before a Senate committee about data privacy. She was, by every measure that mattered in certain rooms, formidable. Up close, in the wash of fireplace light and melted mascara truth, She looked like what everyone looks like when the performance has ended for the night. Just a person. Tired, uncertain, smaller than the version of themselves that occupies a public story. She was also, right now, very obviously not okay. I told Douglas I didn't need anyone, she said. She'd put on slippers, thick wool ones, the kind that looked borrowed rather than bought. He worries too much. You didn't answer your phone for 2 hours. I turned it off. She moved toward the kitchen, an open-plan expanse of dark marble and professional-grade appliances that looked barely used. He had no right to send anyone out in this weather. He was concerned. She turned to look at him over her shoulder. "And you came?" "In a blizzard. For a client you've spoken to twice. You paid for a good service package," he said. It came out drier than he intended. Something in her face shifted, not a smile exactly, but close. "My husband left this afternoon," she said. She said it the way people say things they've been practicing in their head, too flat, too measured. "With his attorney, who is also, as of approximately 3 weeks ago, his girlfriend. I found the hotel receipts last month." She opened a cabinet and stared into it without taking anything out. "He cleaned out the secondary account this morning. Not the main one, he's too clever for that, but enough to make a point." Ethan stood near the entrance, hands in his coat pockets. He didn't move closer, didn't say anything about how sorry he was, because the words would have sounded hollow in a room this size. "The staff," he said. "Where are they? I told them to go home before the storm got bad." "I thought." She closed the cabinet. "I thought I wanted to be alone. I've been alone in this house for years, essentially. One more night shouldn't have felt any different." She turned around then, fully. Her eyes were dry. What was in them was harder to name than grief. "Don't leave," she said. "Not yet. Please." It was not the word please that stopped him, though. She said it the way people who almost never use it do, like it cost something. It was the look that went with it. Not desperation. Not manipulation. Just a person at the exact limit of how much alone they could handle in a single day, asking clearly for what they needed. He unzipped his coat. "All right." He found what he needed in the second cabinet he tried. A can of chicken stock, half a bag of egg noodles, a container of shredded rotisserie chicken she must have bought earlier that week. He commandeered a pot, found the spice rack, and started cooking while Alexandra sat on a bar stool on the other side of the kitchen island and watched him with an expression somewhere between bewildered and grateful. "You don't have to do that," she said. "You should eat something." She didn't argue. She watched him work the way he moved around an unfamiliar kitchen without hesitation, the way he tasted the broth and added a pinch of thyme without asking where it was, and something in her posture slowly, barely perceptibly, relaxed. "How long have you had the garage?" she asked. 6 years. "Bought it from a guy named Walt who wanted to retire to New Mexico." He stirred the pot. "It was a 2-bay operation. I added the 3rd bay and the alignment rack in the 2nd year." "You built it yourself?" "Most of it. My father-in-law helped with the concrete." She caught the past tense. He didn't look up from the stove. "My wife, Renee. She passed 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer, fast-moving. Lily was 4. A long, quiet settled between them. Not uncomfortable, the kind of quiet that happens when two people have both said something true at roughly the same time. "I'm sorry," Alexandra said. She meant it. He could tell. "She would have liked this kitchen," he said, meaning it himself. "She was always complaining I didn't have enough counter space at home." Alexandra almost smiled. "It's not mine," she said. "I mean, it is, technically, but I didn't pick any of it. Marcus hired the designer. I was in Seoul when they renovated." She looked around as if seeing the kitchen for the first time. "I've probably cooked in here 4 times. 4 times in how long?" 3 years. She said it quietly. "I built Arrowwood. I was so focused on building it. There were years I barely slept, years I missed everything. And then I looked up, and she stopped. And here we are." He ladled soup into 2 bowls. set one in front of her. She looked down at it for a moment, then picked up the spoon. They ate in silence. Not the silence of people who have run out of things to say, but the more uncommon kind, the silence of people who have just said something real and are giving it room to settle. Outside, the snow kept falling, and the windows were dark mirrors now, reflecting the warmth of the kitchen back at them. The range hood hummed softly. The steam from the soup rose in thin curls and disappeared. "This is good," she said at one point. Not performatively, just noticing. "It's stock and noodles. I know what it is." She looked at him. "It's good." He understood what she meant. She wasn't talking about the soup. She refilled her bowl. He took that as a good sign. The house was still enormous, but it felt fractionally less empty. After the soup, she opened a bottle of whiskey. Single malt, Scottish, a year older than Ethan's garage. She poured 2 glasses without asking, and he didn't object, because the storm outside showed no signs of letting up and there was nowhere he needed to be. They moved to the living room. She built a fire she knew how, at least, even if she rarely did it, and they sat in the chairs nearest the hearth, not close to each other, with a full cushion's space between them. The firelight made the glass walls look less like windows and more like paintings. "Do you ever feel like you wasted something?" she asked. She was looking at the fire. Not a year, not an opportunity. Something bigger, like a version of your life you chose not to take, and you've spent so long not looking at it that you can't remember what it looked like anymore. Ethan turned his glass slowly in his hands. "Renee and I used to fight about the garage," he said. "She wanted me to take a job with a company in Denver. Better benefits, regular hours. I kept saying no. I kept saying I wanted to build something of my own." He paused. "She died before she got to see me get it right, before it was actually working the way I always said it would." Alexandra turned to look at him. "Did that make it better or worse?" "When it worked? Both," he said. "Every day, both." She nodded. She understood that he could see it. "I used to be someone who felt things," she said, quietly. Not a confession so much as an observation. Marcus was drawn to that. At first, he said I was the most alive person he'd ever met. She looked back at the fire. "Somewhere along the way, I became the person you call if you want something built or fixed or managed. And I stopped being the person you call for anything else." "Alexandra." She turned. "You called me tonight," he said. "You let someone in." The fire shifted. A log popped. Outside, the wind pressed against the glass, and neither of them moved toward each other. And then, slowly, the way decisions happen when you've talked yourself out of all the practical objections they did. The kiss was tentative at first, then not. It was the kind of thing that, once started, you either stop completely or you don't stop at all, and neither of them stopped. The details of the rest of that night belonged to them alone. What matters is what it meant: 2 people at the far edges of their separate kinds of loneliness, meeting briefly in the middle. No promises. No pretending it was something it wasn't. Just that. The storm had spent itself sometime before dawn. Ethan was awake before the sun cleared the ridge, sitting in the chair nearest the extinguished fireplace, his boots already on. He'd been watching the sky lighten by degrees, the deep purple going to gray, then to the pale gold-pink of high-altitude sunrise on new snow. The mountains were immaculate. The world looked scoured clean. Alexandra was asleep on the sofa, a heavy throw pulled up to her chin, her hair across one cheek. She'd fallen asleep mid-sentence, somewhere around 4 in the morning. Not from alcohol. She'd only had the 2 glasses, but from exhaustion so deep it had just taken her. He should have left already. He knew that. He had his truck keys in his jacket pocket. The access road would be passable now. The plow would have come through hours ago. "You're still here." He turned. She was awake, looking at him with sleep-heavy eyes, not startled, not embarrassed. "About to go," he said. She sat up slowly, pulling the throw around her shoulders. She looked at him for a long moment, the kind of look that wants to ask a question, but isn't sure it wants the answer. Do you regret it? She said. The question stopped him cold. Not because it was complicated, but because it was honest, because she was asking it the way she'd probably asked every important question in her career. Directly, without softening it, taking the risk that the answer might be something she didn't want. He thought about Lily, about Renee, about the version of himself that had driven out here in a blizzard for a client he barely knew. I don't know, he said. It was the truest thing he could offer her. She nodded once, as if that were a reasonable answer. He left when the sun was fully up. He drove back through the Hendricks track. The snow had been packed down by the plow crew, just as he'd expected, and he took the county road back into town. Past the diner that was just opening, past the ski rental shop with its lights on, past the familiar gray facade of his garage. He didn't stop. He went home, made coffee, sat at his kitchen table, and looked at the photo of Lily on the refrigerator. It was a photo from last summer, Lily at a water park in Denver. Mouth open, mid-laugh, hair streaming. She looked like Renee when she laughed. She looked like herself. He sat with his coffee and thought about what a person owes to the people they love, and what they owe to strangers, and whether those debts ever actually resolve. He didn't arrive at any conclusions that morning. He suspected he wasn't supposed to. He was still sitting there when, a week later, a man in a dark coat knocked on his door and handed him an envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for $50,000 and a note card with a phone number and 3 words in neat, sparse handwriting. For your trouble. The check sat on his kitchen counter for 3 days. He didn't touch it. He walked past it every morning when he made coffee, every night when he locked up. His sister Janet came over for dinner on Thursday and noticed it immediately. Janet noticed everything but didn't ask, because she could see from his face that the question would not go well. On the 4th day, he called the number on the note card. Alexandra answered on the 2nd ring. I can't take this, he said. A brief silence. It's not a payment, she said. I wasn't buying anything that night. I do understand that, which is why I can't take it. Another silence, longer this time. What will you do with it, she said, if not keep it? He'd been thinking about this for 4 days. There's a program I've been trying to start. Vocational training for kids aging out of the foster system, automotive, electrical, building trades. I have the space and the equipment. I've been doing it informally, 1 or 2 at a time, but I can't afford to formalize it. Insurance, certifications, a part-time instructor. He stopped. 50,000 would cover the first 2 years. Silence on the line. Then, tell me more about it, he told her. He'd expected pushback, or at the very least, the kind of polite detachment that people use when they're mentally already moved on. Instead, she asked specific questions. She asked about the liability structure and what nonprofit classification he'd been looking at and who he'd talked to in the county about licensing. When he finished, she said, I'll have my foundation match it, 100,000 total. Alexandra, don't. He could hear something firm in her voice, but also something that sounded like relief. Like a person who has just found somewhere useful to put their energy. Let me do this one useful thing. Let's call it a clean slate. He thought about that phrase for a long time after they hung up. In the weeks that followed, Alexandra's attorney filed for divorce from Marcus Webb on grounds of abandonment and financial misconduct. The story made the business pages but stayed off the front page, which was exactly where she'd intended to keep it. Marcus, predictably, did not keep it there. He filed a counter-claim alleging adultery, naming Ethan Cole Mechanic, single father, Aspen resident, as the third party. His attorney released a photograph to a local gossip outlet. The image showed Ethan's truck parked outside the estate on the night of the storm. Ethan found out from Janet, who had seen it on a news site. She called him at 7 in the morning before he'd had his second cup of coffee. Ethan, she said, we need to talk. The deposition took place in a conference room on the 3rd floor of a downtown building. Gray carpet, a long table, recessed lighting, a window that looked out on a parking structure. Ethan had driven himself, parked in the structure, walked up 3 flights of stairs. His attorney, a woman named Patricia Okafor, who he'd found through Janet's colleague, had told him to wear a collared shirt and answer only what was asked. Marcus Webb's attorney was named Howard Whitmore. He was in his late 50s, silver-haired, the kind of man who wore a watch to remind you how much he charged per hour. He settled into his chair with the ease of someone who did this every week and found it mildly amusing. "Mr. Cole, let's establish some basics." He opened a folder without looking at Ethan. "You are a self-employed automotive technician. You have 1 dependent child, age 8. Your gross annual income last year was," he named the figure. "That's correct," Ethan said. "And you have, to your knowledge, no personal or social relationship with Miss Alexandra Frost prior to servicing her vehicle." "I serviced her vehicle twice," Ethan said. "We had no prior personal relationship." Whitmore flipped a page. "On the evening of January 15th, you drove to the Frost estate during a declared weather emergency. You remained on the property through the night and were not observed departing until approximately 7:40 the following morning. Is that accurate?" "Yes." "Can you tell me why you stayed?" Patricia set her pen down. Ethan noticed she didn't say anything. She'd told him, "If I don't object, answer. Trust the question." "Her security team called me," Ethan said. She wasn't responding to contact. "They couldn't get up the access road because of the storm. I could, and once you arrived and confirmed she was alive and unharmed, she asked me not to leave." Whitmore looked up for the first time. "She asked you not to leave." She was alone in the house. Her husband had left that afternoon. The staff had been sent home. The road was impassable in both directions until the plow came through. Ethan kept his voice level. "I stayed because she was a person alone in a difficult situation, and leaving didn't seem like the right thing to do." Whitmore let the silence sit for a moment. A technique, Ethan understood, designed to invite elaboration. He didn't elaborate. "Mr. Cole," Whitmore said eventually, "did you and Miss Frost have a sexual relationship on the night of January 15th? Patricia's pen was still. The court reporter's fingers paused over the keys. Ethan looked at Whitmore steadily. "I'm not going to pretend the night was something it wasn't," he said. "Yes, but I'll also tell you that Marcus Webb departed the Frost residence at approximately 2:15 in the afternoon of that day, according to gate records that I understand are part of the discovery in this matter. The marriage was over before I arrived. Whatever happened that night has nothing to do with why it was over." Whitmore wrote something on his notepad. Ethan couldn't see what. "One more question, Mr. Cole." Whitmore put his pen down. "Why are you really here? A woman with her resources, why does she matter to you?" Ethan thought about the question. Then he said, "Because she was a person who needed another person to show up. The rest of it, the house, the money, all of it, that's just furniture." Whitmore closed the folder. The story that ran in the regional outlet was not the story Marcus had intended to plant. A reporter named Colleen Baird had gone past the photograph and done the actual work. She'd pulled the gate access logs, talked to Douglas Graves off the record, and found 2 neighbors who confirmed they'd seen Marcus Webb's car leaving the estate in the early afternoon on January 15th. The plow operator who had cleared the access road confirmed the timeline. Adultery, as a legal matter, requires proof that the marriage was intact at the time of the act. The timeline that emerged from Colleen Baird's reporting and, subsequently, from the depositions made Marcus Webb's claim difficult to sustain. His attorney negotiated quietly for the next 3 weeks and then withdrew the counterclaim. Ethan learned this from Patricia, who called him on a Tuesday morning while he was under the hood of a minivan. "It's over," Patricia said. "At least that part of it." He wiped his hands on a rag and stood up. "Good. Miss Frost's team is pleased," Patricia said carefully. "She asked me to pass that along." "Okay." A pause. "She also asked whether you'd be willing to receive a communication from her. Not through counsel. Directly." He thought about it. He thought about Lily, who had asked him 3 days ago why there was a photograph of his truck on the internet, and to whom he'd said simply that it was a mistake by someone who was angry and that it would go away, and she'd looked at him with Renee's eyes and said, "Did you do something wrong, Dad?" And he'd said, "It's complicated, Bug," and she'd nodded, because at 8 years old, she'd already learned that some adult things were complicated in ways that couldn't be explained simply, and he loved her so much for that. "Tell her she can write to me," he said. "By letter, not a text, a letter." Patricia made a small sound that might have been surprise. "I'll pass that along." The letter arrived 11 days later, handwritten on plain cream stationery. No letterhead. It was 2 pages. He read it at the kitchen table after Lily had gone to bed, with the lamp on and the rest of the house dark. He read it twice. She didn't apologize for what had happened between them. She didn't pretend it was something other than what it was. She said she was grateful, not in the way people use that word to close a transaction, but genuinely, carefully, in the way of someone who has looked at something from all the angles and decided that gratitude was the accurate word. She said the vocational program paperwork was being processed and the funds were in escrow with his accountant. She said she hoped Lily was well. She said she was going to be fine. That she knew this the way you know some things, not because the evidence is overwhelming, but because the alternative is unacceptable. He folded the letter and put it in the kitchen drawer beneath the takeout menus and the spare batteries. The first real snow of the season fell on a Thursday in mid-November, and Ethan Cole stood at the window of his garage, watching it come down with a cup of coffee in his hand, and a feeling in his chest that had taken him a long time to identify as ordinary contentment. The third bay had a different sign on it now. Cole Trades Initiative, in navy blue letters on a white background. It was a Friday afternoon operation during the school year, and a full program in the summer's 12 students, currently, 8 of them from the foster system, 4 from low-income families referred by the county school district. He had a part-time instructor named Gerald who could teach automotive and basic electrical, and a partnership with a plumbing company that sent a journeyman in twice a month. It was not the largest vocational program in Colorado. It was not the most famous, but it was real and it worked, and 4 of its first graduates were now employed in trades, jobs with benefits, which meant 4 people who had the particular stability of work they were good at, and a skill that was genuinely needed. He thought about this sometimes when he was having a harder day. He was also, in 3 weeks, getting married. Her name was Claire Donnelly. She taught 4th grade at the elementary school Lily attended, which was how they'd met in the awkward, slightly comic way of people who meet at school events and have 3 separate conversations before either of them admits that they keep looking for reasons to extend the conversation. She had red hair and a dry sense of humor, and she was very good with Lily, not in the performed way of someone trying to audition for a role, but naturally, the way people who like children are good with children. Ethan had told her about the night at the Frost estate 6 months into their relationship. He'd told her all of it, the storm, the soup, the whiskey, everything that followed. He'd told her about the deposition and the letter and the money and what the money had become. He'd told her because he'd decided that he was not going to build something new on a foundation that had hidden cracks, and because Claire deserved to know who she was agreeing to marry. She'd been quiet for a long time after he finished. They'd been sitting on his porch. It was summer, the nights were warm, and the neighborhood had been doing its ordinary evening things around them. "Did you love her?" Claire had asked. "No," he said. "I don't think either of us was in the position to love anyone that night. We were both just—" He paused, looking for the right word. "Present. For each other." Claire had nodded slowly. "Thank you for telling me. I wasn't going to not tell you." "I know," she said. "That's why I'm still sitting here." They'd sat in silence after that, not a broken silence, but the kind that comes after something important has been laid on the table and examined from all sides and found to be, if not simple, at least manageable. The crickets had been loud that summer evening. A neighbor's sprinkler had come on somewhere down the block. Ordinary life, doing its ordinary thing, indifferent to what was being decided on Ethan Cole's porch. He'd been prepared for her to need time. To say, she had to think. He hadn't been prepared for her to reach over and put her hand on his and say, "I appreciate that you're the kind of person who tells the hard thing. That's actually the most important thing you've told me tonight." He'd thought about that for a long time afterward. Still thought about it sometimes. He saw Alexandra once, from a distance, on a Saturday in October. He was at the market on the edge of town. With Lily, she'd needed a new backpack and had insisted on choosing it herself, and he caught a glimpse of a dark-haired woman near the bookshop across the street. She was with a child, a girl maybe 10 or 11. Ethan thought for a moment that he was wrong, that it was someone else. But then she turned her head in his direction, and for a moment, just a moment, they were looking at each other across 50 feet of Saturday afternoon. Then they both looked away. The package arrived at the garage on a Wednesday morning in December, 3 weeks before the wedding. It was a padded envelope, no return address, and inside was a photograph, a professional print, 8 by 10, mounted on cardstock. The photograph showed a building, a clean, modern structure with large windows and a landscaped entrance, the kind of building designed to feel welcoming without being flashy. Above the door, in clean sans serif letters, were the words, "Frost Coal Initiative, Women's Transition Resource Center." There was a note card beneath the photograph. This time, the handwriting was slightly different, looser, more relaxed than he remembered from the letter 3 years ago. It read, "It opened last month. 60 women served so far. I thought you should know. A." He stood at his workbench for a long time with the photograph in his hands. He'd known, in a general way, that the foundation work had continued. The initial 100,000 had grown into a larger project, and someone from Alexandra's office had been in touch with his accountant about the naming rights over a year ago. He'd said yes without much thought, the way you say yes to things that seem right without requiring elaborate consideration. But he hadn't seen it, hadn't understood fully what that night had set in motion. 60 women. In 1 month, rebuilding from the kind of rupture that leaves you standing barefoot on cold marble at 9 o'clock on a winter night. Not sure whether you want someone to come through the door or not. He propped the photograph against the wall behind his workbench, next to the photo of Lily on her first day of school and the small framed print of Renee that had been there since he opened the place. Then he went to the drawer in his desk, the bottom left one, where he kept the things he didn't need to look at often but needed to keep, and he took out the letter from the cream stationery, and behind it, the cashier's check she'd sent 3 years ago, which he'd never cashed because he'd directed the funds another way and kept the check itself because it seemed like something that shouldn't just be destroyed. He looked at these things for a moment. Then he put them back, closed the drawer, and went back to the vehicle on the lift. He thought about what he'd learned in the accumulation of it all. Not the headline lesson, the obvious one about connections between unlikely people in unlikely circumstances, but the smaller ones, the ones that don't make for clean conclusions. He'd learned that vulnerability is not a malfunction, that the people who seem to need nothing are usually the people who have simply gotten very good at not asking. He'd learned that a single act of showing up, the simple, undramatic, practical act of being present when a person needs another person, can ripple further than you can see from where you're standing. He'd learned that being honest about something complicated is harder than keeping it quiet, and also the only way to sleep well next to someone you love. He'd learned that right and wrong don't always stand at a clean distance from each other, that sometimes you make a choice in the gray space between them and then have to live with what it was and what it became, and that living with it honestly is better than revising it into something easier to carry. Claire was picking Lily up from school that afternoon. They were coming to the garage after, because Lily wanted to show Claire the initiative space, which she'd decided with characteristic 8-year-old certainty was the best part of her father's work and the thing she was most proud of. She was right. It was. He could hear the snow beginning again outside, the soft, particular silence of it, the way it pressed down on the sound of the town. He didn't go to the window to look. He knew what it looked like. He'd seen that particular sky enough times now that it felt like something familiar rather than something that threatened to erase everything. The cold was still out there. It was always going to be out there. But inside the garage, the lights were on, and the heater was running, and across the workbench were pieces of something he was in the middle of fixing, which was exactly where he liked to be. Outside, the snow fell quietly on Aspen, on the mountain roads and the glass houses and the access tracks and the places between them where, sometimes, unlikely people find each other in the dark. It fell on the building with the clean sans serif letters above the door. It fell on the market, where two people had looked at each other once across a Saturday afternoon and then looked away. It fell the way it always did, without asking permission, covering everything equally, leaving the world looking like it had been newly made. Ethan Cole went back to work.